Hey YouTube, welcome back to our channel. My name is Elena.
I'm Bjorn.
And this is Vikings React, where we take a look at some of your favorite Viking shows and discuss their historical accuracies.
So we had talked about doing a little bit of a Q&A for some of our subscribers after we hit our 100 follower mark. So a bunch of you guys have left some comments on our first Last Kingdom episode and kind of reached out to us here and there, drop off some little things for this video. So we're going to have a go at it and answer some questions.
All right, so the first question. You're my favorite couple ever. How did you meet? First of all, thank you.
That's great.
We appreciate that.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a story, actually. We had kind of run into each other, quote unquote, like a couple of times before we met.
Yeah.
We're both into folk metal, right? We're both metalheads.
Surprise.
Surprise. And there were two concerts that were happening back to back one week. I believe the first of them was Arcona, and the next night it was Elevate.
Yep. So we were hanging outside of the venue at like 2 a.m. with like all the bands, and I was with my little perspective group, and you were with yours, and we were like basically side by side, and hadn't spoken at all. And then the next night, we ran into each other at Elevate's concert, yeah, with like Epica and the Agonist. And I had recognized her from the concert the day before and was like, okay, who are you? She was chatting with Kriegel about like vocal things. So like I basically just like wedged myself into the conversation and was like, hi.
The thing that I remember about it was the necklace that I was wearing at the time, that I made myself. It was actually the first Viking knit necklace that I made.
And I forgot about that. Yeah, I like saw the necklace and I like hyper focused on that and was like, I know what that is. How the do you know what that is?
Little did you know, I did my research.
Seriously. And that's what got me. She did her research.
After a while, I was able to come check out the reenacting group that he was a part of, and then it just kind of went from there. All right, so this is a multi-parter. What's made you guys so interested in this time period, and how many years has it taken for you two to gain as much knowledge of the Viking Age? Did you go to school to learn about the culture? So this is kind of a multi-parter. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So I've been like interested in Vikings and stuff, I guess, since I was like a kid, without knowing what Vikings were. And then like as I got older, like into high school, I started to kind of like go off on my own and develop it myself. And I learned all about like the Norse mythology and got really heavily invested into like all of those stories and sagas. And then I also got really into metal, and I found like Amon Amarth and Sephirum and like all those other kind of death metal, folk metal bands that are all based around like Nordic and Finnic and Slavic mythology and stuff. So that like exploded my interest like all over the place. And I just became like a diehard fan after that, basically. But then like that drove me a little bit further. So like I went to school to study history in college, and my school didn't have like many Viking things, and by didn't have many, I mean they didn't have any. So I took like every single medieval Dark Age history course that I possibly could. And just like any time that I could weasel my way into it or weasel my way around it, I would like hyper focus on Vikings and just make every paper, every essay, every project that I did all about Vikings. But I actually ended up being the first in my college to graduate with a brand new minor that was all focused around medieval Renaissance studies. So like when that came about and like I saw like the list of classes that you had to take to do it, I had already taken like all of them. So that like got me through school in like a really fun, interesting way. And I've actually just used that to develop into like my personal life and into reenactment. And just used like what I've taken from academia and applied it to like everything that I do in my life, basically.
It's hard to follow up that story.
Well, it's hard to want to talk after that, to be honest.
Yeah, my story was very different, actually, getting into this. So, believe it or not, I actually got into this by watching the first season of Vikings. my interest kind of began alongside with everybody else in the world, I feel like, because up until that point no one really knew too much about the Viking culture or the Viking Age, and that series kind of opened the floodgates on that, I feel like.
Yeah. And like that's the great thing about it is that like it took like ordinary folk who didn't really know anything about it, and it started their passion with it.
Exactly.
You know, either got them interested or like mildly interested or really devoted to it. So like that's what's great about the show.
Those of you who have been watching us get a little irritated with season 6. You know, might be surprised to learn that that's basically like the first season is where my passion like really started for the Viking Age, because I started understanding and learning that Vikings were not just a bunch of brutes that raped and pillaged and wore horned helmets, you know. And then I got interested in the like a little bit of crafting work. That's where the wire weave started coming from, and I was just starting to get into it a little bit when we met. And then after meeting his Viking group and getting involved with them, that just kind of like exploded. I came into the group thinking I was going to be this badass shield maiden just like Lagatha, and while I could have done that, I actually over the years ended up becoming a lot more interested in the crafts, in textile work, in and especially, you know, now binding every single chance I get.
Constantly.
Yeah, making jewelry, making clothing, all sorts of different things. So that's kind of like where my passion has taken me as far as the Viking Age goes, and also just the lifestyle, the life that they lived, you know, learning about their culture past the warriors and past, you know, all of the aggression. Yeah, so I would say I've applied myself to learning about the Viking Age for about 4 years, but I started getting into it a little bit before that. And yeah, to answer the last question, no, I did not go to school for that. I went to school for media arts and animation, and now I do 3D art and film.
Yeah, and this.
Yes. You mentioned reenacting often. What do you reenact? Specific events, festivals? What made you want to start participating in that activity? You want to take this one?
Okay, so we're both members in a group called Draugr Vinlands. It's a Viking Age living history reenactment group out of the United States. In America, there aren't like intensive reenactment fairs that you see in like the rest of Europe and things. Like there's no Mosgard, there's no Volin or anything like that. We mostly have like our own little events or like Ren fairs or like little, I don't know, like holiday festivals and things like that here and there. So like largely what we do is like we'll go to Ren fairs, and where most of the people will be doing the Ren fair thing, we'll have a like historic encampment set up, and we'll like teach people like the proper Viking experience basically. So like we set up this whole immersive encampment, like everybody has like their own thing to do, and it's all like all active and kind of like hands-on, and you can like walk through it and learn and do all kinds of stuff. We put on like combat shows. We do a lot of like sparring and bouts, and like it's all like none of it's choreographed, so it's all like real intensive sparring. What we also do, and what we've also been able to do by developing ourselves and promoting ourselves, is actually work hand in hand with a couple of museums in the area. So what we love doing is actually working with like museums to put on a historical interpretation and take a very historic approach to the Vikings. They have a much more refined, I guess, palette for it, I suppose, and we still put on a show, and they love seeing that whole thing take action and move, and like take a life of itself. But
it's also different types of crowds as well. It's people that want to learn about the Viking Age as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So we talk about it because we do it every week. We talk about reenacting because we do reenacting every weekend, except for now in Corona life.
Yeah, we haven't been able to do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's awful.
But as soon as we're out of quarantine, we'll get back out there and set up our encampment and do our thing. Yeah, and one of the reasons why we decided to start this channel in the first place is because when we go to different events, we get a lot of people asking us, how accurate is Vikings? How accurate is, you know, Norsemen? How accurate is the Last Kingdom? And we talk about it so much with people that we just kind of figured why not put this out there and like actually discuss the accuracies of these shows.
Yeah.
So that people can then go and like watch for themselves.
Yeah, that experience definitely paved the way to like have the idea to kind of take this and run with it. For sure.
If you could go back in time and alter one or more thing, what would it be and why? That's a hefty one.
You first this time.
Oh goodness. For me, I feel like if I had to go back in history and change something, the big thing that, and it's actually a pretty big thing that I would change, is the invention of the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
Nuclear or atomic? Both, maybe. I don't know. Yeah, like nuclear power itself has been huge in the world, not just as a destructive mechanism, but also as a creative mechanism. But, you know, the World War II, and especially the Cold War between the US and Russia that happened afterwards, has basically amassed so many weapons of destruction that just have no business existing, I feel like.
Yeah.
The mutually assured destruction, I feel like, is going to kill humanity if we're not careful. And we haven't been too careful, I feel like. And it may be kind of like a pageantry answer, like world peace, but I feel like if I had the power to go back in time and change something, it would be stopping the development of those weapons.
So, it said if I could. Honestly, I wouldn't want to change anything, because I don't think I have that right. But if I had to change something in history, I would prevent the Library of Alexandria from burning and getting destroyed. Because that's what started the Dark Age. Like, I mean, simplistic way of saying it, but like, we lost so much knowledge throughout its multiple burnings and destroyed events. But I mean, like, the big one that everybody knows about. We lost so much knowledge with that, and it's a shame, and it put us back so many, like, hundreds, or if not thousands of years. Like, it's like the bane of every historian. Like, you mention the burning of Alexandria to any historian, and we all just, like, take a collective, like, sigh of just, like, 1,000-yard stares, like, war flashbacks in our head, like, awful. So I'd do that, because then maybe we'd all be smarter. Maybe collectively as, like, a society, as a world, we'd be way better off.
Next one. Do you have a favorite Viking/Norse themed movie or TV show, including documentaries? Mine is a little bit of a toss-up between, currently at least, it's kind of a toss-up between Norsemen and The Last Kingdom. Norsemen just because it's hilarious and more or less accurate, and The Last Kingdom because it is, well, the books at least are very accurate, and the show tries to stick close to that at least. In the past it was Vikings because it was always the show that got me into it, but at this point there's so much else out there to kind of choose from.
That's true.
Yeah, I feel like mine is kind of a toss-up between those two. For very different reasons, which is why it's difficult to really say which one's a favorite.
Yeah, I was gonna say. If I was to pick, like, a favorite, I would have to probably go with Valhalla Rising.
I knew you were gonna say that.
It's so good. It's so good. First off, it's got Mr. Mads Mikkelsen, which you can't beat, ever. Like, that's terrific. No, but, like, I love it because it's not necessarily like a Viking story. It's Viking themed. It's like a period piece, I guess. You know, it's set in the Viking Age, and it has all its own inconsistencies and things like that, of course. But like, I love that movie so much. It's so awesome. It was one of like the first real like Viking movies that I saw that wasn't just like cheesy as I don't know. There's something about Valhalla Rising where it's just like conceptually it's brilliant, and it has almost no dialogue in it. Like, the dialogue in the whole movie could fit on one page of paper. And it's super like metaphoric and like symbolic. and it just has all these like different layers and hidden meanings into it, and it's so amazingly done. The set is gorgeous. Like the location scouting was phenomenal. There's some really intense action stuff that like blows my mind out of the water to this day. It's just really unique in terms of like film in general. I feel like only watch it if you can sit through a movie with like 12 lines of dialogue. Like a full feature-length movie with 12 lines. If you can sit through that and you enjoy looking at stuff and just like watching outside, then this is the movie for you.
So this is a two-parter. What is your Last Kingdom's hot air balloon moment? And what is your favorite thing about Last Kingdom?
Boy.
I don't know if I've had a hot air balloon moment with Last Kingdom.
I was going to say, yeah, I don't know if they've ever gone that far off script to get that kind of reaction from me.
I think like the closest I've gotten to it watching The Last Kingdom, I think it was in season 1. There's a scene with Uhtred and Britta out in the forest, and they're talking. It's morning. That's all I remember of the scene. But the outfit that he was wearing was basically these like leather pants and like a leather vest, and it looked so modern in comparison to everything else that I was just like, what is that even? Yeah. Did they just dress him up as a punk? That's like the closest I've ever come to.
The Ren Fair punk.
Yeah, the Ren Fair. Basically, that's what he looked like.
Ren Fair punk look.
That's what he looked like.
That's going to be my new look now.
That's like the closest I've ever come to like a hot air balloon moment.
Yeah, no, they do well with like not being outrageous on the show, historically speaking. Like they take their liberties and things like that with storytelling and everything. But I don't think there's ever been like any kind of like one decisive moment where I've like yelled at the TV or like thrown a tantrum over Last Kingdom. I think I've been pretty tame for Last Kingdom, I think.
Oh yeah.
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 So thankfully they don't have that. So there's nothing to relate it to. The hot air balloon is unique in of itself. Then favorite moment in Last Kingdom? Mm-hmm. Oh boy. I like when they stuck the stick up the dude's...
Oh, that was hilarious.
That was a great moment. But what's even better is when they meet him again, and he's like... and she's like, no, I don't have a stick, you're fine. And he was like, okay. Like they did a callback to it. That was funny as well.
Oh, that was amazing. There is... in season 1 where Earl Ragnar and his men have just come in and raided, I think it was a monastery or something like that, and they have the priest there, and they're looking for the treasure. So they're trying to get the priest to tell them where the treasure is, and the priest is praying to God and saying that, you know, God is going to spare him, God is going to save him.
Yep.
And he retells the story of
Saint Sebastian.
Saint Sebastian that was stuck with arrows. That entire scene to me is just absolutely glorious. The way that it's written, and when I read it in the book, I was just like, you know, I was just basically in tears laughing over it. But
it's like it's so Viking.
It's so good.
Just like the mentality of it, like behind every action, that was like so intentionally Norse.
Exactly.
Like, so intentionally, violently pagan.
Exactly. And they have the translator there who is translating between, you know, the Christians and the heathens, and the priest is telling them, you know, that they should be baptized, and that's they need to like follow the only Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And Ragnar, being kind of interested in what this other religion holds, almost, he wants to know. He likes knowledge, you know, he likes to learn about things, so he's asking about what it would mean to be baptized. And when the priest explains to him what it means to be baptized, he just looks around very confused, and he's just like, you want to wash me? I lost it. Say theoretically, the Great Heathen Army didn't fail to conquer all of England. How would world history look different? Would William the Conqueror have had the motivation to invade Daneland? How would our lives today look different? How would religious beliefs be different from what they are today for that region? and even North America, if at all.
I mean, William the Conqueror had a claim to the throne because of an agreement that he had with the, at the time, King of England there. They were also all Christian at the time. So, like, if the Great Heathen Army had actually taken over England, everything would have changed. Literally everything would have changed. Like, heathenism would have had a huge bastion, like a huge island of belief there. That's not the proper term. Like, they just would have had like a huge stronghold on the island of England.
It's kind of like the butterfly effect, like what would have really changed at the time. And if England became fully heathen instead of Christian, would Iceland also have stayed heathen and other territories as well?
Yeah, I mean, would they have converted so largely when they were attacking other settlements, or would they have held on to their faith longer and made more demands or more claims of power, and would they have consolidated more territory, essentially? I would think that there would be a huge confrontation after that. I think it would be... It's tough to say, because even, like, in the Great Heathen Army, like, there were multiple, like, clans or nationalities of Vikings and Irishmen and all kinds of Scandinavian things like that had all joined together to fight there, and they had their own issues just holding the army together, like, from a morale standpoint. And then if they had conquered it and taken that as an extension of Scandinavia, I would imagine that they probably would have divvied the country up to each of the main leaders of the camp. There might have been conflicting wars between those three, but it might have been split up as just a 3-nation state, basically. But I definitely think it would affect heathenism as a whole. I think we'd have a much more lasting impression of what Dark Age heathenry was.
Part of the takeover of England, part of the intention was to settle there, to bring over their families, to, take over farms and take over the lands and live there. So if they were successful in that, I do think that, ancestry from that region would be even more different nowadays, and that would have basically become a big Viking settlement.
Yeah, I think leadership would be drastically different. I think monarchy would be drastically different going forward in history.
Absolutely.
William wouldn't have a claim to the throne at all because that family lineage that was there to make that claim wouldn't have existed, or wouldn't be in power at the very least. I think heathenry would have lasted much longer, and we'd have a much better idea of what it was. I think we'd know a ton more about the Vikings. Like,
I was about to say,
like, comparatively to what we have, like, we have a lot of information, and it is still a tiny fragment of what we, like, what there is to know. Like, we know next to nothing about the Viking Age. Maybe that's what I'll change in history. I'll go back in time and change that just to see what happens. That'd be cool.
Following up on that, what was the real reason the Great Heathen Army failed?
I mean, it was a mix of many things. It would have been like lack of motivation, of just the war dragging on and on and on and on. It would have been Alfred the Great's retaliation in his like magnificent rise to glory. Like, you cannot discredit that. Was amazing, to say the least. And like I mentioned in the point just beforehand, there was a bunch of clans all united that were constantly like at odds with each other and stuff. So there would have been a breakdown in leadership and communication and morale and stuff within the Viking camp as well. So it's just, there's a ton of that going to that.
Yeah, I think it's a number of things. It's not like any one specific day or any one specific event that caused them to fail. The other thing I think that is a factor in it is just the number of men that they had. It was the Great Heathen Army. They had a lot of men. And, for what it's worth, they did almost take over Wessex.
No doubt. They came this close.
Yeah, King Alfred, the last kingdom showed it. King Alfred went into hiding for a time.
For months.
Yeah, because he had lost his stronghold for a while, and then he made the comeback. So I think if they had more manpower, they could have done it. they just came very, very close, but didn't quite make it there. Okay, what did they eat? Did they have spices or was it bland? Take me through a day's meals, and have you guys tried to cook any dishes? We, as in us two, have not.
Not really, no. Personally, not quite.
But our group has.
Well, you
Some
know
people in our
what?
group have.
Actually, speak for yourself. I have.
What have you made?
I had a feast when I was in college
Ah.
for a couple Viking pagan holidays.
Oh, okay.
So I have some experience with it myself personally. So, like, most people think that, like, Dark Age medieval food and stuff like that was bland and kind of flavorless, but that's not necessarily the case. There's not a ton that we know about, like, Viking meals or, like, Viking recipes. That's pretty hard to determine. You have to kind of use what you have and reverse engineer it to figure out how it might have been prepared and things like that. So in terms of, like, food, we know obviously they relied heavily on fish and root vegetables. There was also some game meat from, like, reindeer, from, like, hunted birds, like grouse and things. There was also beef and cattle, and like legumes. Hazelnuts were native to Norway, hazelnuts were native to Scandinavia, and they had various, like, all kinds of, like, boysenberries, lindenberries, currants, things like that. So they did have a pretty wide range of food available to them. And then in terms of, like, cooking, a lot of food needed to last a long time, so it was often boiled or pickled, or, like, fermented, which are not the most appetizing methods to store and save food, but it's what they had, or also smoked. No, but we kind of think of their food as being bland, and that's not necessarily the case either. Common meals, yeah, maybe sure, especially compared to what we're used to in a modern day. I mean, we're used to just sensory overload everywhere we go, whether it's food or advertisement or, like, anything. Like, everything that we have nowadays would be, like, a luxury and a half to anybody in the Dark Age as well. But, I mean, they had a plentiful amount of salt. They had salt mines as well as living by the sea, so they can easily make that. And we also know from grave finds that some people actually were buried with very unique spices, like allspice and cumin were found in graves. They did have access to other spices from faraway lands that they definitely used and took advantage of, and would have been highly sought after as well, because that's something that you don't find a lot of places.
A lot of it was also, farming and stockpiling of food for the winters, for the winter seasons and everything like that. Yeah, but in terms of, the regular day-to-day dishes, there would be a lot of stew.
A lot of stews, a lot of soups, things like that, because it's plentiful and it's easy to make. And you can make a ton of it. So they had bread, but they didn't have, like, a risen bread. It was all, like, kind of flatbreads and things like that. And then for feasts, they'd have, everybody kind of thinks of a feast. But they definitely had, like, their luxury foods and their, like, sweets and desserts and things like that. Like, there's this beautiful, like, egg nut pie with, like, a honey cream sauce and stuff, and then they'd even had the ability to make really amazingly flavorful foods.
There's actually a really good book.
There's a couple.
Yeah, there's a couple of them. An Early Meal is the one that our Jarl has.
Yeah, there's a cookbook called An Early Meal, which is, like, a staple of Viking cooking. Really well done and really well sourced. And yeah, that's just, like, a necessity. If you want to learn about, like, Viking foods and Viking cooking and how to prepare Viking meals and things like that, that is definitely one to go for. The Reba Viking Center is also a great source of that, because it's all living history and, like, immersive day-to-day life. And they actually not only make all that information available publicly on their website, but they also have a bunch of recipes on their website as well. So definitely check that out if you're interested in Viking food.
So next question, and I'll pose this one to you. Necropants?
Why to me?
Because you like talking about it.
I guess. Yeah, necropants. Necropants are a thing. In the Museum of Iceland, Google it. It's weird as...
Do that at your own risk, though.
I had to, so you now have to as well. So basically, to create necropants, I'm going to explain how to create them before I explain why. So to create necropants, you have to enter into an agreement with a willing participant who is alive. Keyword. They have to be alive and willingly make the agreement themselves to allow you to do this to them. So when they die and are buried, you dig them up, and then you cut off their skin from the waist down all in one piece, and then you tan their leg skin into a pair of pants. It's the necro, and we got the pants now. Put them together. And then you put yourself into those pants like the skinniest of skinny jeans. And then you take your shiniest silver coin and you put that silver coin into the of your necro pants. Why do this, you ask? Great question. You do this because the magical properties of the necropants and the silver attracts magically more silver to it. Not like a magnet or anything, just like through happenstance or through luck or something. And you will then become very, very wealthy. And you better be, because you're wearing your friend's legs. But this was like a legitimate magical practice from back in the day. We don't know if it's Viking necessarily. It definitely has some kind of like older tradition. There's a pair of them, like I mentioned, in a museum in Iceland on display. And so we know it's a thing that happened. Somebody did this. At least one person did this, which is enough. Maybe more. But yeah. Necropants? Like, yeah, right? What? Amazing. Amazing.
Last question. Are you guys as hyped for World of Warcraft Shadowlands as me? So, don't hate me, but I'm not a gamer, so I'm going to turn it over to the guy that actually does gaming.
Yeah, I'm what you would call a casual. No, actually, I don't really know anything about Shadowlands coming out, sadly. I got into WoW, like, back in the day, like, at the end of Burning Crusade, and mostly was there for, like, the hype of Wrath of the Lich King, which I've been told was, like, their Viking-ish based expansion. So that's what I, like, grew up into WoW with, and I was still leveling and doing all that kind of stuff, to, like, 70. I don't know what the max is now. I think it's in the hundreds, like 120 or something. I'm not really sure. It doesn't matter, really. But then I kind of stopped playing. Like, a subscription eventually ran out, and, like, I didn't have proper gear levels and things, and I, like, stopped after a while and got back a little bit into it in Caddy when somebody tried to steal my account, but then, like, didn't change the password and thought I wouldn't find out about it when, like, people were messaging me on the game. So then I just logged in and changed the password, so I just got my account back for free, and they were, like, using my account to mine, and so I just, like, had a maxed level smithing skill, which was cool that I took advantage of and made a bunch of cool stuff to sell. But that was only for, like, the month, and then, like, I lost interest again, and then they didn't win me back at all with, like, the Jack Black sponsored Kung Fu Panda expansion and stuff like that. Like, it was silly. So yeah, now I'm gonna have to look into it and, like, get psyched about it. If you're asking me about it, it's got to be Viking related. So we'll see. Maybe I will be after this.
And right. I think that is all the questions that we have today. This was fun, guys. Thank you so much for submitting your questions. We do enjoy answering them and interacting with you in the comments as well. So feel free to ask us anything in the comments here as well. Any, like, other Viking questions, like history questions, life advice, more recipes, dishing about that one coworker. If anything comes up in the series that we don't cover, or, like, that you learn about and think of and want to learn more about, feel free to pose it to us and we'll be happy to, like, do a little side tangent on it. It'd be cool. Thank you guys so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you can be notified of our future videos. And we'll see you in the next one.